Sorry, forgot a bit of business there. I started writing humor when I was 8 years old, so I've been doing it now for over 50 years, and I've done it for pretty much every medium you can think of. I'm going to start with actually a contest. For those of you who are not on the panel, sorry panelists, you're not eligible. There are, as far as I know, at least 5 humorous science fiction TV series that have had new episodes produced in the last 12 months. Name 3 of them. Put your answer in the chat, and the first 3 people with 3 correct answers will win e-copies of 3 of my books. So there you go. So while we're waiting to see if anybody can, nope, oh, no, stop, oh, okay,
Listen to directions, people.
Okay.
I think Ilmani actually got it right instead of listing just one there.
When, of course, you give the answer to everybody in the chat, I should probably have said you should give the answers to me directly. So I tell you what, Ilmani, you win with your 3, and I will give, again, 2 more prizes to people who email me with 2 others, okay? So the correct answers were The Orville, Rick and Morty, and Avenue 5, okay? There are at least 2 more. Obviously, Ilmani, you've already won, so you're now not eligible for the second leg of this contest. If anybody can give me 2 more, we're good to go. Okay, so without getting into sort of master-classy theories of comedy, which I'm sure we could all do, I'd like to ask the panel, just as an opening question, what do you think is funny, and why are you attracted to the kind of comedy you are? We can do it free for all, or I can, call on people. Okay, let's do it calling on people, starting with Alex.
Well, I always say humor is subjective. There's no, writing is subjective in general. When you pick up an anthology, you're not going to love every single story, even though the editor probably did. Humor is even more subjective than that. So I try and find stories that are very different from each other. I try to find some absurdist humor. I try to find some puns. To make sure there's something for everyone, because you're going to hate some of the stories no matter what, because of how humor works. For me personally, I really like sarcasm and sort of just dunking on pop culture. So I think Rick and Morty is very much along my that's where my personal humor sweet spot lies. If we're going to use the TV shows, but really you can utilize almost any style and format of telling if you're sharp and if you're making interesting original jokes.
Okay. Sean, what's your approach to humor? How do you look at it?
Oh, I love the unexpected, the surprise humor. When things just arise, and that's what happens when I write and a joke comes on. Because I can tell you, Scott Lynch is the author of The Lies of Locke Lamora. And he's also a former firefighter like myself. And so in this particular book I'm writing right now, we had a conversation on Twitter to where I said, you know what, I'm going to name a character Lot Skinch, which is just a thing of his name. And it's created a lot of wordplay and a lot of humor in there. I like surprise and unintended humor. One of my favorite things to watch is Found Footage Festival on YouTube, which is a bunch of 80s VHS tapes that people discover. And it's the most ridiculous stuff you've ever seen in your life, and it was completely unintentional humor.
Okay, Marie?
I'll riff off a bit of what the other two panelists' great answers were, but I think on the unexpected end too, what I like is I like having like idea that someone is going really or a situation is going really counter to what everybody else expects, but they don't necessarily notice that it's really counter to it, right? It's like the world is going this way and this character is meeting and they're going this way while still very much participating with what's happening over there, but they don't realize that they're creating this weird rift just by their actions and just by reacting to things in a way that nobody expects them to, or that is so counterculture. I really enjoy playing with that, and it's not to make it a comedy of one person who's just, you know, they're such an idiot, they're fun to laugh at. I don't find that fun myself. Like, I find that a little bit awkward, maybe because of high school memories. But having that one person who goes in a different vein than everybody else, but is still part of things very much so, but still it becomes funny with just how they react to everything because it's so different.
Well,
And the reaction from everybody else.
Exactly, which is like, what? But okay.
how do you feel about the works of Molière? Because, I mean, a lot of Molière's writing is about specifically one person who has one trait that is pushed to its absurd levels.
Yeah, I like some of Molière's work, but like if you look at like Le Malade Imaginaire or something like that, where it turns like it goes from a comedy, and then because it dives in with the dark quite effectively as well, then I find that it levels off the insanity portion to making fun of one person. Not all of Molière's oeuvre is to my liking, personally, because of that. Sometimes it's just too much on the nose. But I do like when he does, like the Malade Imaginaire was one of my favorite ones, just because it does bring in the contrary and the contrast to it, where it does get quite dark while still being light. But I haven't seen it in like 10 years, and I might change my mind now as I re-see it. So I'll have to re-see the play and then let you know what I think, Ira.
Okay. I expect your review on my desk. Brad, how about you?
Honestly, my favorite thing about comedy and about humor is watching or letting the audience make that connection, right? And like the gap between so stylistically, the stuff that really appeals to me is the sort of dry, like I love the straight man, you know, where like everything is insane, but the character is straight, and you just, it unfolds without too much song and dance. Like it's there, you get to react to it, the audience gets to laugh, but you're not telling them to laugh. And like for me, that's the magic in a good joke or a good, you know, comedic bit, is the gap between when you read it and then when you make the conclusion and you make that connection in your head and you're like, oh, that's why that's funny.
Mm-hmm. I had a grade 13 English teacher, they're not professors in high school, who said that the basis of most comedy is juxtaposition of the absurd. It's taking two items that don't normally go together and smashing them together to see kind of how they work, right? And one of the things about that I think is kind of important to understand is that the best humor has to be interpreted, right? Because, and it's actually a two-step process. Think of, well, the go-to I usually use is Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, which on the surface seems to be about selling the children of poor Irish immigrants to the wealthy British for food, right? And it was quite outrageous when it was considered quite outrageous when it was written. And the actual point is that, if I remember correctly, Jonathan Swift was a parliamentarian, and he tried to get laws passed that would help the poor, and Parliament would vote them down constantly. And at the end of A Modest Proposal, he says, kind of outright, telling us what the point was, all of my reasonable attempts at dealing with this problem have not been implemented. So maybe this unreasonable attempt will work somehow, right? Putting it back on, taking it away from the absurd premise of selling children for food and putting it back on the politicians who leave people with no other options, right? But you have to read it in a way that you understand what his point is. And if you don't, then you've got this horrible, horrible piece of writing about somebody who wants people to sell their children for food, right?
Yep.
And I've said, and this will be my last point on this, it's better. There are two sort of broad types of humor. One is the type that you get immediately. The joke is all there, and it's all sort of spoon-fed to you. You can laugh or not. I find most TV sitcoms are at that level. It's just there, and that's it. But there is the humor, more sophisticated, where the viewer, the reader, has to interpret what the meaning of the joke is. And some will, A, not interpret it correctly, just miss it, and so they won't get the joke entirely. B, there are people who will deliberately misinterpret it. The great example is either All in the Family, if you're old enough to remember that, or The Colbert Report, if you're maybe a little younger and remember that. Both of them were parodies of right-wing characters. Both of them, both Archie Bunker from All in the Family and the Colbert, Stephen Colbert, as in the Colbert Report, were taken up as heroes by the right. Right? They were like, yeah, I know Stephen Colbert has to kind of make fun of us because, he does humor and that's what he does. But really, he believes in our causes. He is one of us, right? Yeah. And no matter how many times he himself in interviews would say, no, this is a character I'm making fun of, I figure they had to deliberately misinterpret what was there. But when you do get the joke, when you do sort of make that connection, the light bulb goes off in your head, then you're making the audience complicit in the humor. Right? They're part of what makes the joke work. They will remember it more, and they're more likely to appreciate it. So, rant off. Can you tell I've actually studied humor? Another question for the panelists, and this is, we're at a very specific niche where we're combining humor. It's not just straight up comedy, but it's comedy with speculative fiction, comedy with science fiction, comedy with horror, comedy with fantasy. And that's kind of complicated. The way I usually look at comedy is drama plus. So comedy has to do the same things that drama has to do. It has to tell a compelling story with interesting characters. And on top of that, it has to make people laugh. Now, when you're talking about, say, comedic science fiction, now it's drama plus plus. You still have to do all the drama stuff. You still have to make people laugh. And you have to have enough genre elements that genre fans will accept it as a genre piece of work. That's a lot of balls to be juggling in a single piece of writing. So I'm wondering from the panelists, why did you set yourself up such a difficult task? Like, what is so compelling about humorous speculative fiction that that's the genre you write in? That's what you want to do. And I'll go round the opposite direction. So start with Brad this time, I think.
This is one of those things where it's like, it doesn't matter what I try to write. It ends up like I end up back in that ditch. And, every now and then I can write things that don't have any humorous elements in them, but that's the things that my characters seem to want to do. It's the stuff that I find interesting. And honestly, I think part of it is it's the style of writing that I fell in love with as a teenager. Like Hitchhiker's Guide for me was one of the first science fiction books that I just could not put, like that whole series, I just plowed through it, could not put it down. Harry Harrison and like the Stainless Steel Rat series, Bill the Galactic Hero, Death World, like those to me just spoke to angsty sort of I don't know, unhappy teenager on such an inspiring level of like, you know, this world can be, you know, the universe can be so different and so funny. And the way he addressed political issues and satire with such a deft touch, but at the same time was so fun and entertaining and silly in some ways. Like that is always kind of to me been like, that's what I want to write, like that kind of stuff. So that's honestly why I end up writing that kind of fiction.
I actually feel you on the rare occasions when I try to write something serious. It sucks. I can't do it. So I always have to come back to it. Marie, what do you think?
I think, well, for me, I mean, the journey towards writing humor was partly the journey towards learning a second language. And every time I learned, so I'm Francophone, and I didn't learn English until university. They didn't test me. They should have tested me. Anyways, I muddled through, miracle of miracles. But the thing that I found the most difficult when I got there, and it was all English, and I think I'm funny, so I'm trying to make jokes, and jokes are very cultural, they're very situational, they're very dependent on how you weave language. And I couldn't tell jokes for like a while until my English got good enough, and then I could tell jokes, and then I was in, and then I started storytelling, so it's like performance storytelling. I'm not reading, I'm telling you a story, and I wanted to tell funny stories. But my performance style wasn't to the point where it could support funny stories. And I realized dramatic stories are easier to tell because it's easy to make people cry. It is so easy. Dead children, dead mothers, dead parents, dead dogs, and people will weep. And right there in the room in front of you, no shame, make them cry. I could do that. And then I got better, and I learned how to make them laugh, and not with like, slap jokes. It was like giant Jesus stories, and then the whole audience is laughing. I almost had someone fall off a chair once. I was so proud, so close. And then with English, and then with the writing, I think the same thing happened where I started really dramatic. And then with the shorter pieces, so mostly my social media presence, people would say, I read your social media and I follow you there, and you're so funny. And then I read your books and you're so dark. What the hell? And I pondered that a lot. I was like, that's interesting. Why do I write shorter, funny, and lighter, and then I write so dark in my novels? And it turned out it was just a craft thing for me. So whenever I like get to a higher level in something, basically I lend towards the humor where I'm more comfortable and I prefer to express myself. But it takes a certain mastery that I am slower than everybody else to develop, and I'm okay with that. But I've noticed that I always tend to eventually lend there. It's a very circuitous route that I enjoyed the journey. I sing, I make rhymes, it's good.
Sean?
So here's the thing I've noticed. When I'm angry and I'm around a group of people and I just let loose, everybody just starts laughing their ass off. And I'm like, what are you laughing at? I'm mad. Like, this is real, this is serious stuff. And so I've just discovered that that's just my natural inclination to lean toward pointing out certain aspects of what I'm angry about or what I'm concerned about comes across as humor. And I think, Ira, you were talking about all of that, and it reminds me of shock humor. And I think if shock humor is done correctly, it makes people pay attention. And when you have people's attention, then they can actually learn something. It's like with me, I have ADD. My son has ADD. I talk with my wife about this, is that you have to take things to level 11 in order to get our children to listen to what we're talking about and to actually know, like, hey, don't hand on the hot stove, etc. But also, I'm with Brad. I never set out to say, I'm going to write a humorous story. I set out, all right, these are the plot points. This is the thing I want to tell. And organically, it just comes about. And personally, I think organic humor is so much more well received. It's like in high school or anywhere else, those people who try too hard to be funny and all of their jokes end up landing just flat. And nobody laughs, and you feel so bad for them. But then you have people who are just speaking from their heart, and everybody just, falls apart laughing, crying. I think when it comes to humor and storytelling in general, as long as you're coming from heart, some people are just naturally good at it. And I'm not saying I am. but when I go on a rant, people laugh. So maybe
Well, let's just assume for the sake of argument that everybody on this panel is hilarious. They're greatly funny people, so we don't have to praise ourselves in any way. Um, the connection between humor and anger is fascinating, but a little bit, unfortunately, kind of out of our range of what we probably should be talking about. So instead, I'm going to go to Alex. Same question.
Sure. So every writer inevitably takes a certain amount of time to find a voice that they're really comfortable in, and we identify them by that voice. So Terry Pratchett, Douglas Adams, who's been mentioned, you pick up an excerpt and you can immediately tell that it was written by one of those guys because their storytelling is so unique. And we're not Pratchett's, but we do all develop a certain level of a unique voice. And for some writers, that voice happens to be comedic. And we just don't know how or why that happens, but it's a natural place for us to inhabit. For me, I wrote a lot of stories and I sold a lot of stories that had no comedy in them whatsoever. I never imagined myself writing humor or comedy or being involved in that until one day I sat down to write a story and I just did not care. I just wanted to have some fun with it. I stopped caring about whether that story was going to sell somewhere. I stopped caring about whether it's going to fit into some sort of a mode or something that most people would find publishable. And a humorous story fell out. And I found it so much easier to write it. And I found my voice to be so much more alive when I was writing it that I almost immediately knew that this is the type of writing that I should be pursuing. Now, I would imagine most of us don't just write humor. Marie mentioned that she's writing some darker stuff. I'm sure the rest of the folks in this panel do as well. Maybe with the exception of Ira, but I'm sure you can write. I'm sure you can write serious stuff if you put your mind to it. So I don't always write humor, but it is certainly. I've written 2 novels to date. One of them is a really serious dark novel, and one of them is a humor novel. And let me tell you, I felt like I was playing the same video game, but the mode was set to easy when I was writing the humor book. So I think again, it comes down to each writer finding their natural outlet and their natural voice.
Okay. Okay, so I can see I can give 2 answers to 2 different parts of this question. And then I just want to remind people that if you have questions for any of the panelists, please leave them in the chat area. Otherwise, I can just keep asking and keep talking amongst ourselves. But we really do want to open it up to you if you have anything to ask. So the first question is, why humor? And the best answer I ever gave, as I've mentioned a couple of times already today, I was a script geek before I was a prose geek. I wrote a lot of screenplays, took a lot of screenwriting courses at university. And I was also a contributor to a magazine called Creative Screenwriting back when it was an academic journal and not the glossy magazine it is today, but it was still fun. And after 9/11, which is an indication of how long ago that was, we got an email from the editor saying that he wanted to do a special issue about the role of the artist in times of national crisis. So I wrote a piece, probably my favorite nonfiction piece that I've ever written, called Laughter is Always Appropriate. I started off by talking about my dad who laughs at funerals, which most people think is awful. And he will in fact tell jokes to get himself to laugh, which people think is even more awful, and understandably so. But then I talked about Sullivan's Travels, the movie Sullivan's Travels, great Preston Sturges movie, about a film director who directs comedies during the Depression. His big goal in life is to direct a dramatic film about the plight of the common working man during the Depression. The problem is he has never met any common working men, so he doesn't know what to write about. Bottom line is, he realizes through the course of the story that, well, no, common people, regular people, the poor, the downtrodden, They don't need movies about their lives. They already live their lives. They know how miserable they are. What they need is something to make them laugh, something that will give them respite from their suffering, if only for a short period of time. So you look at that and you think, just for movie trivia buffs, so he abandons his big epic film about the Depression and goes back to producing comedies. The film he was going to produce is called Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And if you're familiar with the Coen brothers, they actually claim that Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is the movie Sullivan would have made if he actually made his big dramatic film about the Depression. A little bit of movie trivia. Like I say, I was a film guy before I was a prose guy. Very briefly, I also talk about the fact that when we laugh and when we smile, it releases endorphins into the brain. It's the brain's natural painkiller. So in fact, laughter, I believe at some point in our evolution was the same thing as grimacing and crying. You use mostly the same facial muscles when you do both. And laughter kind of broke off with different social meaning, but it's still a response to pain. And inducing laughter is a way of giving people a free high. It's a natural high, right? So just to loop it back, my dad is a Holocaust survivor. Nobody has to teach him about death. He hated funerals. Laughing at funerals was his way of coping with the horror of our mortality. And on the one hand, while I still have respect for people who think it's a terrible thing, on the other hand, it's understandable and human. And so I find creating humor and making people laugh is actually has a very sort of moral component to it, if you will. It's a good in the world because it helps us, and we all, life is hard for all of us, and anything that can help us get through is valuable. Okay, are there... Okay, good question from Joe Kennedy. How do you make sure your humor doesn't come across as mean or cruel? I see some nodding. Sean, you're nodding. Why don't you take that one first?
Sure. I think the easiest answer is that as long as the joke is not directed at marginalized people or people who are already under the thumb of society, that's a good first rule to have. It's so much cleaner, I guess is the best word I can come up with, to direct it at a common enemy, so to speak. So big government or fascism or things like that. I think if you going with the adage, don't kick someone when they're already down, that's a good rule to have. Don't direct it at somebody who is already being made fun of outside of the realms of humor.
Yep. In the field, and most of you are probably familiar with this, this is the difference between punching up and punching down. So direct your humor at the powerful, not the weak. When you direct your humor at the weak, honestly, it usually comes across as bullying. It's ugly. So don't do it. Children at home, don't do it. Marie, anything you'd like to add?
Two things, aside from definitely do the upward, the uppercut upward, is also, I prefer situational humor, partly because of that. If there's no humor that's directed towards a person or an entity that could be applied as mean, if you will, or that could feel that pain, and also a lot of editing. I find I personally edit my my humor pieces so that the prose is clean enough to deliver the humor, and then withdraw without overdropping things. Because even if you do a 1-2 punch of humor, if you're doing 1, 2, 3, 4 until they're like the face is beaten and bloodied, it can skip a jump there from like, it was funny the first 2 times, but now I'm starting to feel bad for the person I shouldn't feel bad about because they've been piled on. So I generally make sure that I give some breath and some breathing room between those punches, even if it's punching up, so that it lands every time and it's not just they should be knocked out. It makes the person feel bad. Nobody likes to watch someone getting piled on unless they're terrible. Don't be terrible.
Be a laser, not a shotgun.
Yes.
You see, I'm a shot cannon. I have, the way I construct humor is that I start with, well, okay, I do a rolling edit. So I will edit the stuff that I wrote yesterday before I get on to writing new stuff. And I'm constantly adding new jokes. So there are sentences of mine that have 2 or 3 jokes in them, 2 or 3 comic ideas in them. Yes, and oftentimes my main concern is that my readers are going to feel bludgeoned, for sure. That is a consideration. Oh well, it's what I do. Brad, answer to the question?
So
I saw you nodding.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking, so like that's a really easy answer in comedy. In fiction, it's a little harder, but I think you have to, I don't know, like for me, it's always you have to punch in, not up or down, but like when you make yourself the butt of the joke, when you make the main character the butt of the joke, when you make, someone in the story that people have already cared about or invested about the butt of the joke, then I feel like it's a little, then it's okay. It's for me, there's a little bit in like, especially as a white man, there's a lot of stories that aren't mine to tell, right? And there's a lot of humor that's not mine to tell. And there's a lot of jokes that aren't mine to tell. And you have to be smart about how you tell the jokes and how you write the jokes about things that are, I think, sensitive or could be taken as mean or cruel, and which person you're making fun of and which person you're, I don't know, like which person's shoes you're proverbially standing in.
Who deserves it?
Exactly.
Alex, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'll offer a slightly dissenting opinion in that I feel if you're going to engage in using a lot of humor in your work, you have to take chances. And that means that occasionally, you should never do this intentionally. You should never, write to be mean, and everybody's covered that. But occasionally, you're going to piss some people off. And if you're not doing that, then your humor may not have much of an edge. So having said that, a joke is something that you're able to share with your audience. You're both supposed to be laughing, not just you, the writer. Your audience is supposed to be laughing too. And that's why it's so easy to make up fun of things that we can all agree on. We can all make fun of the bureaucrats, right? Like bureaucracy is a thing that no matter what kind of society you come from, what your political views are, social views, you can make fun of bureaucrats. You can make fun of people who are bad drivers and cutting people off or something like that, because we can generally all agree that is a bad thing, but it's also not, cultural or anything like that. So you can find easy targets like that if you want to be really, really safe. But then your humor will kind of lack that edge a little bit, and sometimes you have to come close to the edge without crossing it if you want your comedy and your writing to matter.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just say something, and then Brad, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'd love to respond to that.
Okay. Actually, Brad, you respond, and then I'll say what I want to say. Sure, go ahead.
Well, I think that's a really good point. And I wanted to go back and re-caveat what I was saying earlier. I think it's great to be cruel and painful to yourself or to, when you're addressing a real source of pain. Because the best comedy, my favorite comedy is comedy born of the worst pain, like the most awful imaginable stuff, to trot it out and to make light of it. And, it takes away its power. It gives people a lens to view it that makes it tolerable. And some of the most awful things in life make for incredible comedic material if you can just write about them the right way.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
It's about telling the truth.
Well, everybody has their own truth, but
That's true.
there is a very deep vein of satire in what I write, and particularly the last couple of years, I've written a lot of topical humor, and my approach to this is that that I know it's going to offend some people. My hope is that it will offend the people whose opinions don't count to me anyway. Anyway. There are a couple of other questions. Hugh Spencer, who is a tremendously funny man in his own right, asks, is humor high art? A lot of people tend to kind of poo-poo humor. It's not serious. If you want serious art, it has to be a serious novel or a serious piece of writing. How do people feel about that? And since you got the last answer last time, I'll start with Brad this time.
I mean, high art that's a tough word. I'm going to say yeah, because I like humor, but I mean, it's not for everybody. You know, some people just don't feel it. I think man, I don't have a long answer for that, but my short answer for that is yes, because I like it.
Okay, good answer. Does anybody on the panel disagree with that?
Not necessarily disagree, but I will say that it doesn't have to be. And it also depends on your definition of high art. When Andy Warhol set out to paint Campbell cans, most people did not consider that to be high art, but today more people do. When Shakespeare wrote his plays, nobody considered them to be high art. You know, they were pop culture, and today they're certainly considered to be high art. So you can have humorous works that will survive and eventually become high art, but I don't think that you can write them as high art in the moment when you're creating them. I think that you have to speak to sort of a more of a common denominator, so to speak, and speak to the people, and that's what the really great stories do. And the ones that survive more than a few decades are usually things that were not considered to be hoity-toity or high art when they were initially written.
And if I can add on that too, I think the thing that happens, like you mentioned, high art is kind of selected by others, and sometimes it takes some time. But with humor, one of the things that takes some time for it to become high art is it still funny within a certain amount of time? Like, did you write the piece in such a way that it was culturally relevant when it was happening, but that outlasts that moment in time where you wrote it as well? With drama, which I think it's easier to cross drama across cultures. You have a lot of the same beats that are very much the same. And humor, you have a lot of the same beats as well, but the lenses through which cultures view humor can be so different from one end of the world to another that it's the same thing with time. It's easier for humor to get left behind than drama, because humor 200 years ago might not be, 10 years ago even, might not be applicable anymore. So the label of high art is, mind you, high art, it might be that it's not understandable, but the label of high art might be hard to claim or to keep past a certain time, because it's no longer relevant, or people don't engage with it in the same way anymore.
Okay. Sean, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, so correct me if I'm wrong. The question was, does humor work in a serious work?
Is humor appreciated in the same way as serious drama?
I would think so, yes, if done correctly. And I know a lot of people who would appreciate humor more than quote unquote serious work. And some of my favorite serious high art works have humor in them. And I think the goal of that is to relieve the pressure. It's good to keep that tension, but you have to release that pressure off at some point, while at the same time keeping it interesting, if that answers the question.
Okay. I'm actually going to follow on something that Marie said. And this is not specifically intercultural, but it is something that I've kind of realized for a while. In the early 1960s, there were two movies that came out that dealt with an almost identical subject matter. One was a comedy, the other was a drama. And one of the things I would say about the difference between comedy and drama, and this is following on what Marie said, is really it's more the lens that you see it through. The one film was a film you're probably all familiar with called Dr. Strangelove. And the other film, which was released within 6 months, either before or after Dr. Strangelove, was a film called Failsafe. And you may be familiar with Failsafe because a couple of years ago, a live TV drama version of it was produced by George Clooney and starred George Clooney, right? Absolutely the same plot. Somebody in the Pentagon goes crazy and sends bombers into Russia. And the drama is, are they going to be able to recall them, or is there going to be some international nuclear incident? Okay. Dr. Strangelove still blows me away as one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. Okay. Failsafe, serious, grim drama. Right? And yet, oddly enough, and this might go to Alex's point, Dr. Strangelove is the movie that's remembered. Very few people remember Failsafe, and far fewer would have remembered it if Clooney hadn't done his version of it, right? This was an amazing workshop in the difference between comedy and drama, and it's very thin. It's not all that different, right? Robert Runty actually. Robert Runty actually made a point, and he asked it as a question, but we can, deal with it as a question or not, as we will. He pointed out that when it comes time to give awards, comedies tend to be overlooked. It's the dramas, the dramatic films, and the dramatic TV series that tend to get the accolades when comedy isn't. When comedy isn't a category of its own. And his point was, comedy doesn't seem to get the respect that good drama does. Does this complicate things? Does this matter? Personally, I'm very skeptical of awards anyway. So, this just may be one more reason why you shouldn't take them that seriously. But how do other people feel about awards?
I think there's definitely truth to that. Very few comedies make it far enough, or certainly win awards. And this is not only true in genre, but also if you look at the Oscars, if you look at any of the film awards, any of the serious literary awards, it's not often that comedies are in the top tier there, for whatever reason. Now, I say this as somebody who won his one and only major award for a comedic story, so I'm really being a little disingenuous there. But having said that, that was the first time. This was the Wiscar Award for explaining Cthulhu the Grandma, and this was the first time that a humorous story ever won that award when I did. Since then, I think there was another comedy story that won as well. But it's certainly a rare occurrence, and I think it goes back to the point I was making earlier in that. People will not consider current comedy as high art, even though, as Ira's point goes, it'll survive if it's really good, and it will outlast a lot of the more dramatic works.
Okay. Does anybody else want to tackle the issue of awards? Which is fine. You don't have to.
Well, I think
sure.
just agreeing with that, definitely. And I think part of the thing with awards is because comedy can be very unifying, but it is also, and I think we've all touched on it to some point, it is divisive to a certain degree. Like some people will find something some won't. And in drama, the themes are almost more universal, even though the same themes are tackled in comedy. Anybody feel free to fight me on this, by the way. The same themes are often tackled in comedies, but because of the lenses that we put on them, sometimes it's seen as less accessible to certain people, or people are more scared of it, or they don't judge it by the same lenses. So because these are often juried things, it's easier to come to a consensus over, yes, it was sad when the puppy died, than it was funny when the puppy died.
Mm-hmm.
It's never funny when the puppy dies, just to be clear.
I was like, I don't know what movie you were watching.
101 Dalmatians.
Oh God!
So
Laughed all the way home.
Yeah, is the point of this panel to make Marie cry? That's cool. That's
not fair.
You need a moment?
I'm good. I'll soldier on.
Okay. The way I look at this, and this might kind of ping off the point, but I think it is kind of relevant, is that I look at the difference between actors who work primarily in comedy and actors who work primarily in drama. Okay, actors who work primarily in comedy, they get so much love. They get love for the comedy, whereas actors who work in serious drama get respect. And one of the things that's been long fascinating to me is that each of them wants what the other has, right? So comedians who get all this love, they want respect. But dramatic actors who get all the respect, they want the love, right? And that's why you get, actors trying to cross over. And once in a while, like I find, and I'll throw this out to the panel, I find that comic actors actually adapt to drama more easily than dramatic actors adapt to comedy. Any dissent on that? Any agreement? Any thoughts on that?
I agree.
Well, I mean, yeah, I was just going to jump in and say, like, Adam Sandler in Punch Drunk Love and Uncut Gems. Uncut Gems is like, the entire movie, I wanted to turn it off. It's just so painful. I mean, not like in a bad way. Like, there's so much angst and pain in that character throughout the entire movie. And, like, this is the same guy who played the water boy, who's just, but, like, the depth was there.
Yeah.
This is the first time that I strongly disagree with something that was said on this panel. I think Adam Sandler is just as terrible in that as he is in every single movie he's ever been in. And there are some amazing comedic actors that have done such great work in drama, like Robin Williams and Jim Carrey of all people. I mean, I can't stand most of Jim Carrey's comedies just because of the style of humor, but his dramatic work is amazing. But I could not watch this movie or most of his other work.
Yep. Has anybody seen Jim Carrey's TV series? He just did it a couple of years ago. It's 2 seasons. I'm blanking on the name, but it's about a Mr. Rogers type of character who 6 months before the series starts, or a year before the series starts, one of his twin sons died, and he's slowly falling apart, and he's repressing it, and it's not working, and it's both hilarious and really, really dark at the same time.
Kidding.
Sorry? Kidding, yeah.
It's called Kidding.
Called Kidding. And I had never had much respect for Carrey until I saw that, and he blew me away with his dramatic performance. I will defend Punch Drunk Love a little bit. What the director did in Punch Drunk Love is he took the Adam Sandler man-child that he plays in every one of his movies, and he pushed it just a little bit in a dramatic setting. And I do think it works, even though I would agree with Alex. As an actorly stretch, it really doesn't stretch him that far. But the setting makes the performance work in a much different way than his comedies do. But De Gustibus is not... you can't argue with taste. Whatever. Afterlife with Ricky Gervais, also really good. Yep. I'm just going. Okay, so technically, we're supposed to be done. So I'm willing to keep going if the other panelists are, but keep in mind that it's been a long day and I haven't really eaten all that much. So, if you want to take pity on me and just say some final words, that'd be okay too.
I just have 15 more questions I wanted to ask Ira. Just 15, that's it.
You can do that privately. We don't need to do it here. Okay. Marie, people love your the word balloon behind your head on the wall.
Thank you.
Okay. I thought there was another question, but the problem with doing it in chat is that it's really hard to pull them out.
If I may, I kind of wanted to jump on that question specifically, and it was whether it's different to edit humorous fiction, rather than editing dramatic fiction, and how that pertains to beta readers as well. So I edit a lot of humorous fiction every year, both for my anthology series, for other anthologies, for the magazine, beta read, etc. Plus my own work. And it is absolutely different. There is an entire additional tool set. There's a tool set that you will use to edit short fiction that may be different from editing novels. There's an entire additional tool set that you apply to editing humorous stories. And a lot of it, probably the most important difference, there's a lot of subtle differences, but the most important difference is that you have to pay attention to the beats, the comedic beats that you have in the story. When you're writing comedy, you're kind of, if you're good at it, kind of almost comes naturally. But even so, a good editor will realize when the beats are imperfect and will help you improve them. And it's very similar, I would say, the most similar to regular editing is when you're paying attention to the pacing in a regular story. You still have to pay attention to the pacing in a humor story, but then you have to pay attention to the beats as well. They are not always the same thing. So that's a real important difference, and a good editor who can edit humor will improve even a good humor story by leaps and bounds with their edits. So there's definitely a huge difference. And I'll stop because I'm sure other people have thoughts on that also.
Yeah, I mean, that's why it's an old adage, and that's why it's survived so long, is that it's all in the timing. Good writing, period, is all about a certain musicality, and especially when it comes to humor. And if you miss it, it's lost. And people see that. And maybe they can't pinpoint why it doesn't work, but they know that it doesn't.
Okay. Yeah, what I often say is that good comedy dialogue can be timed with a metronome. It's actually, I wrote a piece for Creative Screenwriting, which they didn't publish, that compares comedy sketch writing with music. And my example was Who's on First by Abbott and Costello. And it's just like tick-tock, back and forth, over and over, back again. And it's brilliant. And it's true. The rhythm of prose is taken for granted by a lot of writers. A lot of writers just don't write rhythmically. But particularly when you're writing comedy, that is so important to get down. I am gonna call it. I'm going to get to one more question and then final comments, final thoughts. The last question I want to get to is, can you offer names of comedic writers who are perhaps comedic science fiction writers who are perhaps not as well known? So, okay, we know Douglas Adams, we know Terry Pratchett. Can you give us other examples, other books or writers that we should be looking for? I don't see any heads nodding, so I'm going to have to start with somebody. Brad, there we go.
So I really like the Epic Failure trilogy, Joe Zieja. Hilarious. And it's not like it's my kind. It's just dry, and the beats just, when they land so hard, and they're hilarious. But Martha Wells and the Murderbot series, like the Murderbot novellas, are just, I don't know, like I feel like I can go half an hour without a laugh, but then when it hits, it's like I'm on the floor. It hits so hard.
Okay, Marie?
I am currently I'm thinking of works that have some humor in them, but that aren't like, well, I guess like the Murderbot series. Jim Hines. I particularly like his Princess series. It's quite fun and funny too. It has a lot of levity to it and a lot of darkness. I mean, he's a good friend of mine, but I'll shill his first book out anyways. Derek Kungsken, his first book, Quantum Magician, has a lot of really dark and really funny, really dry humor, much like Derek has. And also, he named the character after me, and she likes bombs, and it makes me happy. And it's a really good book. Like he's newer on the scene when it comes to that, but really worth picking up. A lot of fun. Those are some that are just popping up into my head right off the bat.
Okay, Sean?
I agree with Jim Hines, who's a friend, and I'll mention two other friends who I really enjoy in their humor too in their work. It's Peter McLean, especially in his Priest of Bones series, as well as Nicholas Eames, Kings of the Wild, Bloody Rose, fantastic fantasy, but also great humor throughout. And I know that this particular author isn't in the speculative fiction realm, and I know he's problematic, but Charles Bukowski, his work is just, it's hilarious throughout. The bottoms and the highs, there's a undercurrent of humor throughout, at least that I found.
Okay, and Alex?
I'm going to go a step more obscure and name a few authors who don't have novels out yet, but they have a lot of short fiction out. And a lot of, some of it is serious and dark, but a lot of it is absolutely hilarious. So the people that would recommend that you look up are Shannon K. Garrity, who writes both fiction and comic strips. James Beeman, who is currently on the CIFA board of directors, and he has a lot of short stories out in places like FNSF and other magazines, and a lot of his stuff is extremely funny. And Zach Shepard, who's also been published in a bunch of short fiction outlets, but hasn't even started writing a novel yet. So if you want to get on board with great writers really early, those three would be my top recommendations.
Okay. I'm going to recommend a couple of friends first, and fortunately, you can't see his picture, so if he blushes, we won't see it. Hugh Spencer's Extreme Dentistry is hilarious. It's dark fiction about an alien invasion that is foiled by Mormon dentists. There's nothing quite like it. I love the work of Timothy Carter. His work is often theologically based. Check out The Five Demons You Meet in Hell, which is just a hilarious novel. Then two that I don't know personally, but I think are really interesting. One is a man named David Wake, who wrote a book called iPhone, phone. It's from the point of view of a smartphone that is actually smarter than its owner. The plot kind of weaves a little bit. I wasn't crazy about the plot, but the concept is really, really funny. And an author named Midas Green, who wrote a novel called The Ardley Effect. The Ardley Effect is the closest thing I've ever seen, the closest thing I've ever read to Douglas Adams. He nails that kind of British, dry, intellectual humor voice. I'm willing to give him credit and say that he wasn't actually intentionally trying to mimic Douglas Adams. I'm willing to say, okay, he grew up in the same intellectual milieu and developed a similar voice, right? Your mileage may vary, but if you like Douglas Adams, that's a book you're probably going to like. Okay. Final thoughts, and we'll go around the other way. So, Alex, anything you'd like to end with?
So a number of years ago, I wrote an article about injecting humor into one's writing, because a lot of writers struggle with this. They either try so hard that it becomes terrible, and somebody mentioned that earlier on this panel already, that that's a really bad mode of failure, or they just don't know quite how to inject humor into their work. So I'll go ahead and spam the link into the chat. If you're interested in in writing humor, I hope this article will be helpful too.
Okay. Sean, last thoughts?
I agree with Alex. To catapult off of that, have fun. Have fun when you're writing. If you're not enjoying it, nobody else is going to. And that goes double for when it comes to humor in your writing.
Okay. Marie?
I like all of these so far, and I will continue to build on that. There's a lot of voices that tend to infiltrate into the creative process. There's everything we hear on the internet, everything we hear from professionals on panels, at cons, from editors. We read in writing books, and at the end of the day, it really is just write the story that you're having fun with. Forget about what the market expects. You don't know. Forget about what you think the reader will want. Write what you want to write and what you feel your voice lends itself best to, and have fun with it. That will get you far.
Okay. Brad?
So I think, honestly, for me, as a comedy writer, somebody who writes humor, I think you kind of have an obligation to find things that are painful and poke at them, and find people that need de-pantsing and de-pants them. And I think if that's your gift to write humor, then go out and use it in a way that makes people feel better about their pain and laugh at people who need to have their pants pulled down.
Okay. I would just recommend that everybody keep laughing. It's good for you. I'd like to thank the panelists and thank you all for showing up. Thanks everybody who asked a question. I think we got to most of them. I am going